Hey folks, it's me, Christiana Gaudet, with the first of a series of free live tarot webinars here on YouTube. I see a few of you are already here. Thank you so much for being here. If you happen to be watching the recording, thank you for being here. This is live at, today is January 19th, 2020. Here on Eastern Standard Time, it is 10:30 a.m. It could be all kinds of time wherever you might be. And I thank you so much for being here. So you may have had the opportunity to download the class material. This is available on my website. If you go to the comments right here on YouTube, you'll see a link for it. The link is also available in the Facebook event notice on Eventbrite, and also the event notice on my website, christianagaudet.com. So if you haven't had a chance to download this and either print it out or look at it on your phone, whatever's easiest for you, please do. Hey, Marion, it is 3:30 p.m. in the UK. Robin, 2 a.m. You know, I was trying so hard to come up with a time that wouldn't make someone have to be here at 2 a.m. And I didn't do a good job for our friends on the other side of the globe. Robin, thank you for being here nonetheless. Jeannie, glad you're here from Arizona. Shannon, good to see you. If you are here coming into the room, do say hello and do feel free to interact with each other in the comments and also to feedback to me. So this class is the 4 elements and the Major Arcana. Mystic Soul Oracle. Catherine, so nice to see you here and hope to see you in Tampa next week. Robin's like, it's not a problem at all to be up at 2 a.m. doing a tarot webinar. Rogerio, it's 3:30 in Portugal. Okay, this really is the World Wide Web, and we are worldwide. Okay, so 4 elements in the Major Arcana. What I need you to do, if you have your tarot deck with you, is to separate out your Major Arcana, the 22 cards of the Major Arcana, numbered 0 through 21. And instead of putting them in numeric order, you're going to put them in elemental order. If you happen to have the handout here, you can see in the bottom grid, you can see the elemental order. I will read it out to you in case you don't have it. The interesting thing is the 4 elements are really almost universal when you talk about indigenous spirituality across the planet. Just about every culture has some association with the elements of life. They may not have the same associations that we have. If you look at the Chinese 5 elements, if you look at Native American elements, the attributions are different, but the concept is the same. And this is something that to me says, we're really onto something here. That when we work with the concept of the elements of life, there is something universal and true and spiritual here. Now, we know that in the minor arcana of tarot, each element is associated with a suit. And that's one of the ways we learn to read the suits is by thinking about the metaphysical properties of each element. We know that in astrology, each astrological sign, each planet has an elemental association. And that's one of the things I'm going to ask you to be doing today, is to think about the element of your sun sign. Hey, Kathy, nice to see you here. So go ahead and comment in with the element of your sun sign. I'm Scorpio, and so my element is water. What's yours? And if you're not sure, of course, in the top grid here, we can see that fire is Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, that earth is Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, air is Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius, water is Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. And so, as you separate out your major arcana, put them in order of element, starting with the fire cards. That would be the Emperor, Strength, Wheel of Fortune, Temperance, Tower, and Sun. The earth cards are Empress, Hierophant, Hermit, Devil, and World. The air cards are Fool, Magician, Lovers, Justice, and Star. The water cards, High Priestess, Chariot, Hanged Man, Death, and Moon. And you have noticed I've left out Judgment. And that's because judgment could be either water or fire. And that's something we need to talk about today. Which way do you see it? Do you see judgment as water or fire? So let's see some of the elements representing here. Shannon, Pisces, water. Rogerio, Gemini, air. Marion is earth, Taurus. Robin, Capricorn, earth. Jeannie, Leo, fire. Martha, Leo, fire. Catherine, Mystic Soul Oracle, Taurus, earth. Kathy, Sagittarius, fire. Laura, Pisces, water. So, as you separate out your major arcana into elements, you will find that some of these are a little surprising. And I feel like when we learn the elements of each major arcana card, it gives us a whole other way of understanding the card, a whole handle into the card. And it will help us to understand ourselves. We have 4 piles of major arcana cards here, 1 for each element. One of the questions we're going to be exploring is, when we look at the major arcana cards associated with your sun sign element, do these cards reflect you in some way? How do you see yourself in those cards? So we know that when we think about the major arcana, we often think of it as the suit of ether, the 5th element. However, since each of these cards has an astrological association, each of these cards has an elemental association as well. Now, it's interesting to note that they don't divide out evenly, do they? There's 22 cards. There are 4 elements. So the first question is, which element has the most major arcana cards? You are probably not surprised to hear that it is fire. And when we think about it, I mean, can you make the argument that fire is the most spiritual of all the elements? I mean, on one hand, I would say all the elements are spiritual, all the elements are necessary. But if you think about the metaphysical aspects of fire, let's see what we have here on our chart. We have the powers of vitality. That's passion, that's creativity, that is your life force. That's why in so many tarot decks, the wands aren't shown as flaming, they're shown as blooming. They have leaves, they have flowers, because fire is the life force energy. Fire is your growth, your sexuality, your humor, your anger, your spirituality, your energy, and your motivation. When we look at the earth cards, we see earth as being about the material resources. That's your money, your wealth, your home, your physical goods, practical matters, stability, groundedness, and solidity. And one of the things I love about looking at the 4 elements in the major arcana is that, you know, when we look at the minor arcana, especially in weight and weight-based decks, hey, Mary, nice to see you here. You're an Aquarius, so you're air. So The weight-based decks, we all know that the swords cards, the air cards, are like the most brutal images. If you notice here, not so when we look at the four elements in the Major Arcana. There is not one elemental group in the Major Arcana that has more brutal illustrations, more difficult cards. You know, if you think about like what are the difficult cards in the Major Arcana, you've got Death, that's water. You've got the Devil, that's earth. You've got the Tower, that's fire. It's kind of spread all over, right? And air, if we look at the air cards, none of those cards, like probably the most brutal of all of them, well, the Magician can be a little bit of a trickster, certainly. Justice can be tough. The Lovers can be tough, but not in the same way as like that 3 of Swords, 10 of Swords, 9 of Swords. It's just not like that. So I think that when we look at the four elements and the Major Arcana, it helps take some of the sting, the negativity, away from all the air cards. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's go through these cards, looking at their elements, and let's discuss how the element fits in with the card. Maybe it makes perfect sense. In some cases, I think it does really make perfect sense. In other cases, it really does give you pause for thought. So we're going to start actually with air because the Fool, card 0, is air. And those of you who are born under an air sign, that would be the Geminis, the Libras, and the Aquarius people, pay special attention to these cards because we are going to ask you how these cards speak about you and how you see yourself in these cards. So the Fool is an air card. What do we see in the Fool? We see beginning the journey. We see taking a leap of faith. We see innocence. We see the decision to move forward. We see that we are moving forward without really knowing where we're going. So how does that reflect air? How does the Fool's journey reflect air? Please go ahead and chat in your own thoughts here. My thought about the Fool's journey and air is, first of all, he had to make the decision to do it. Secondly, what is the Fool doing? He is learning. He is learning by experiencing his environment. Now, the Fool specifically is related to Uranus. And if you think about Uranus, Uranus is very deviant, really. Uranus does its own thing, which is really, I think, a thing about the Fool. We're going to just do what we're going to do, and if other people don't like it, that's really going to be their problem, not ours. We will jump off that cliff. And, you know, you think about it, the idea of jumping off a cliff doesn't feel good, but in the Fool, it's really glorious. And let me ask you, do you ever see the Fool as saying, you know, don't jump off that cliff? Don't do that. That is really being foolhardy. For me, that will show up sometimes. That's really when we look at dignity. A well-dignified Fool is all about, let's take that leap. When the Fool is reversed, when the Fool is ill-dignified, that's when you have to maybe exercise a little bit of caution. But all of that is a mental process, isn't it, as we figure these things out. Now, the Magician, which of course is kind of the next card. We've got card 0, then card 1. The Magician is also air. Now, what's the difference? They're both learning, aren't they? The Fool is learning through experience. The Magician is learning through studying his tools. The Fool, Uranus. The Magician, Mercury. And looking at the difference between these two expressions of air is a really interesting way of looking at air. With the Magician, there's a lot of communication. With the Fool, there's just a lot of process. So, Josephine, Aries Sun, Gemini Moon, Sag Rising. When you said that we were born under the sign, do you mean our sun sign? Or may it be rather as a dominant sign in your chart? So for this exercise, I'd like you to look at your sun sign, the element of your sun sign, and the major arcana cards related to that. Now, going forward, taking a look at, well, which are the cards related to your rising sign and how do they express in your life? Which are the cards related to your moon and how do they express in your life? This is an ongoing, lifelong study. And ultimately, you're going to want to look at all of that. But for the purposes of this webinar, let's look at the cards associated with your sun sign. So for you, that's going to be your fire cards when we get to the fire cards, because you, Josephine, are an Aries sun. Okay, so magician. How many of you really see the magician as a trickster, as someone who is trying to fool you? It can come up that way, but I will tell you what, 9 times out of 10 in a reading, when I see the magician, it's about going to school, very literally, taking a class, learning something new. The magician can also talk about initiation, starting something new. This is a young card, and it always bothers me when there are decks where the magician is depicted as being old with like a white beard or that kind of thing. I can never see the magician that way because to me, the magician is always going to be young and youthful. So we see air expressed in both of these cards. We are learning, we are thinking, we are making decisions. We are, with the magician especially, we are communicating. Okay, what is the next air card? This one might shock you. It's the Lovers. And you know, this is, I don't want this to be a whole webinar about how I gripe about modern depictions in tarot, because every tarot deck has value. If it doesn't have value to me, that's okay. It might have value to you. But I notice in a lot of modern tarot decks, we see the figures in the Lovers embracing. It's very sexual. And truly, if we look at the traditional Lovers, it's not water for romance and love. It's not fire for passion. It's air. And I think this gives us a real hint into ways we can interpret the Lovers. And I've seen so many people say, oh, it's the soulmate card. And, you know, the cards have to speak to you the way they speak to you. And if that's what you see there, that's great. But while the Lovers can talk about a love relationship, the Lovers can talk about any kind of integration. And this is where air really comes in. It's about the way we communicate with each other. It's about the decisions that we make in relationships. Marion agrees with me, yay. Often, one of my key words for the card, the Lovers, is integration. And it may be about how two people integrate with each other, but it may be about how you're going to integrate having a kid and working a job, or working a job and going to school, or the fact that your best friend and your husband don't like each other. How are we going to integrate that? And all of that is very much an air process. It's very much a process of figuring out how we're going to do it. Excuse me. And you know, another thing, again, thinking about Lovers as air, communication and decisions. Even if we want to talk about romance here, aren't those two, like if you think about your love life, anybody's love life, communication and decisions, aren't those like the two most important things in figuring out a relationship or figuring out your love life? Marion says she was just doing some journaling on this last night. Excellent. Jeannie says the Lovers is union and joining. Mystic Soul Oracle, I see the Lovers as decision-making and transmutation of energies. And Marion says, or are a couple intellectually compatible? Sure, absolutely. So, this may help you expand your understanding of this card, the Lovers. Okay, so the next one, I don't think anyone is going to quibble with this. Justice, of course, related to Libra, is air. Now, typically in a reading, when I see justice, I think of two things. Sometimes it really is appearance in a court of law, dealing with attorneys, dealing with contracts. Sometimes it's about fairness. Often, when I see the Lovers reversed or ill-dignified, I call it the you got screwed card. Either you did get screwed or you sure are feeling screwed. And so with this, the aspect of air that we see here is that sense of fairness. What is fair? How does that work together? How do we make everything balance out that way? Gypsy Jade is a Capricorn. Glad you're here. So you're an earth sign. Okay, our final air sign may blow your mind a little, maybe not. The star. So in most illustrations of the star, and this is one of my favorites, of course, it's a very watery card. We're in water, we're pouring water onto water and water onto land. It's all watery, but you guys know the star is the water bearer. The water bearer is associated with Aquarius, and Aquarius is an air sign. How is the water bearer an air sign? How is star related to the element of air? It's easy. And this really informs my entire understanding of this card. How do we often see this card? Hope, wishes fulfilled, fulfillment, healing. I call it the good sex card as well. I got to tell you that. But when you think about it, what's going on here? This isn't water. It's starlight. It's heaven's healing light poured upon the land. That's what the water bearer is doing. The water bearer is a star pouring starlight onto the land. And that's the power of this card. And when you think about that aspect of air, being hopeful, being fulfilled, allowing for healing, because all healing happens in the mind first, doesn't it? And think about that, and now apply that thought to those really dark, difficult minor arcana air cards. The 3 of Swords, the 8, the 9, the 10 of Swords. Does that help you find the healing in those dark images? Okay, and Kathy says, achieving acceptance. Is that going back to the Lovers, maybe? Because we're moving kind of quickly, when you're talking about a card, just put the name of the card so I don't get confused, because I'm easily confused. But I think you're right. And if you go back to the Lovers and think about acceptance, what is like one of the most important parts of any relationship? We have to accept each other. So now, those of you who are air signs, how do you see yourself in these cards? I'm going to ask you to comment in on that a little later when we get through all these cards, but I want you to think about that. Marion says, my Aquarius sometimes seems like they are from another planet. Kathy says, I'm trying to take notes, but I'm not fast enough. I know, I'm sorry, I'm such a fast talker. Will this video be saved? Yeah, it'll be right here on my YouTube channel. And if you're not a subscriber of my YouTube channel, please become one. And yes, this will be here forever. It will also be archived on my website, christianagaudet.com. Okay, So now let's move on to Earth. And we've got a lot of Earth people here. And Kathy was like, yes, that's what I was talking about, acceptance in the lovers. And I like that. I think we should all sort of add that to our list of keywords for the lovers, accepting each other. Nothing to be sorry for. We heard each other. We got it. All right. On to Earth. So no surprise here. The first Earth card in the Major Arcana is the Empress. Makes sense. She is the archetypal Earth mother. She is pregnant. She is a mother. She gives birth. She represents all sorts of fecundity, all sorts of growing and fertility. And Suzanne says, I tend to identify mostly with my ascendant sign, Aquarius. Yeah, you know, my ascendant is Leo, and I look like a Leo. I act like a Leo in a lot of ways. So yeah, I totally get that. Mary says, I often feel like I'm from another planet, and I'm an Aquarius. So see, there you go. Okay, so is anyone going to argue that they don't see Earth in the Empress? I think not. Now, my question is, when she comes up in a reading, how often does she represent your mother? How often does she represent actual pregnancy? How often does she represent the feminine aspect of divinity? How often does she represent fertility, creation, that kind of thing? And Robin says, I pull this card for myself a lot. Yeah. And does that reflect you, Robin? Are you sort of that person who nurtures others? I do see you that way. Okay, so the next Earth card, the Hierophant. So, you know, people find the Hierophant to be somewhat problematic. And I think that's because the Hierophant is the Pope. And, you know, you can look at this one of two ways. The Pope is God's representative on earth. The Pope is also this sort of dictator telling us what to do and gathering up the world's riches and using greed and shame to control people. And so all of that is in this card. Oh, Robin said, my son's girlfriend is pregnant, so you're about to become a grandmother. No wonder the Empress is coming up for you a lot. Suzanne says she is the most earthy Major Arcana to me. Earthier than the world? Interesting. Jeannie says all three of my birth cards are Earth, Empress, Hermit, and World. Goodness. And here's Christine from Connecticut. Hey, where in Connecticut are you? So glad that you're there. You know, I come to Connecticut a few times a year and am available for readings and parties when I'm there. How was that for shameless self-promotion? Good to see you. Glad you're here. All right. So, how do you handle the Hierophant in a reading? One thing I will say, and it's interesting that they are both Earth cards, a key word that I see in common with both the Hierophant and the Empress is authority. The Empress is the authority of the home. The Hierophant, the authority of the church. Marion says, I have real trouble being a Taurus and identifying with the Hierophant. And the Hierophant is the card of Taurus. So when you say you have a problem, like it doesn't fit for you, or you like the anti-Hierophant, Eden Gray was like my first tarot book way back in the day. And she described the Hierophant ill-dignified or reversed as the card of the iconoclast or the hippie, you know, which I really liked. Okay. Hey, Andy, nice to see you here. Andy says the Hierophant is like a guru. And doesn't that make sense? You know, when we think about the whole concept of having a guru can be a wonderful thing, but you can also give up your power to a guru, and gurus sometimes abuse their power. So we have authority. The Hierophant can come up in a reading to tell you to use your authority, claim your authority, seek authority. Very often in a reading, the Hierophant is your boss. The Hierophant is your doctor. The The Hierophant is your attorney. The Hierophant is a police officer, an authority figure. Now, on a spiritual level, of course, the lesson here is to accept your own authority and do not unnecessarily give authority to others, but to respect the authority of others. Mystic Soul says, I like to think of the Hierophant as a shaman. So how does that shift for you? The difference between priest, guru, shaman. All the same thing, really, right? I mean, they're just really, in my mind, different cultures, but different cultural words for exactly the same thing. And in my mind, something that can be very helpful and healing, or something that can be very abusive in any of those cases. So share with me if you fundamentally would see shaman differently than guru or priest, outside of the obvious cultural differences. So, it's an interesting thing because the Hierophant is this very spiritual card, but the clue is he's of earth. He is earthy. So there is going to be that tendency toward abuse of power, toward accumulating power, accumulating wealth. This is not someone who is air and, studying the sacred texts. This is not someone who is fire and really trying to create a spiritual connection. This is not someone who is water and trying to pour out compassion. This is earth. And so when we see this as a spiritual character, as an aspect of spirituality, we do have to remember this very human, earthy aspect of this. And Suzanne says, I like the iconoclast aspect of the Hierophant. Absolutely. And Marion is the anti-Hierophant. I know, I hear you. I hear you. Suzanne says, as an Aries sun, I kind of resent being told what to do by the Hierophants of the world. The inner Hierophant means more to me. Well, yeah. And there are people who always like to give up their power to others, who will always have, give more power to their teachers than they will take for themselves. Mystic Soul says, I agree. All those terms, priest, shaman, guru, Hierophant, ultimately interchangeable. Absolutely. Okay, so the Hermit is also of earth. Let's see, Martha says, I see the shaman as one who bridges between worlds, between earth and the spirit realm, just like the Pope, God's representative on earth, to bring wholeness and healings. Shamans don't ask for allegiance as a guru or a priest might. Depends which shaman you speak with. I've known as many shaman abuse their power as any other. Within my experience, I've seen a lot of abuse of power in my experience. And it is interesting how one's own experience will inform the way one sees a particular card. And I think that that's an interesting challenge. For instance, if you had a terrible mother, if you were abandoned by your mother, if your mother was abusive to you, you might see the Empress very differently than if you had a very loving, nurturing mother. Now, ideally, what we want to get to is we meet the cards through our experiences, but then we want to get to that archetype. So the person who had not a good mother should still be able to understand the nurturing mother archetype. And the interesting thing with the Hierophant is this nurturing spiritual leader or is this abusive spiritual leader? I would argue it's both. What do you guys think? Okay. Mary, could it also mean doctor giving a diagnosis? Oh, heck yeah. Or the need to see a doctor. Very often, the Hierophant will come up to say, get thee to a doctor now. And that can be something that tarot will do. There are probably I don't know, tens, 20s, hundreds, I don't know, of people who over the course of my career will credit me with saving their lives. I did not save their lives. What happened was, in a reading, the Hierophant came up aspected in such a way that I was like, something's going on with you. You need to see your doctor right now. And they did, and found a health issue quickly enough to abate it before it did major damage. Now, that's not to say that will always happen, but sometimes the universe will work through us to get people where they need to be. And the Hierophant might get you to the doctor. Okay. Martha agrees about the abuse of power with spiritual leaders. Suzanne, I'm a hermit tarot year. Makes sense with so many planets in Capricorn right now. Sure. Okay. So back to the Hermit. Hermit, also an Earth card. How do we see Earth for the Hermit? You know, the Hermit is such an interesting card. On one hand, it can speak to loneliness. It can speak about someone's social energy, maybe being more introverted or just being lonely in their lives. It also talks about that arduous journey towards spiritual enlightenment and ultimately being a light bringer or a way shower for others. However, here's a bit of history to think about. The lamp that the Hermit holds was originally an hourglass, a timepiece. He is Father Time holding a clock. That's why he's the card of patience. Now, how did that become a lantern? Well, because candles were also used as timepieces. A candle burns in a certain time period. When the candle burns down, that time has elapsed. So it became the lamp of wisdom much later. Originally, the dude is holding a clock, Father Time. Now, Father Time, as related to the earth, makes so much sense. Because the earth runs on its own clock. You know, we tell time based on the turning of the earth, our relationship with the sun. That's how time goes, and that's why we have to be patient, because there's nothing you can do to speed up the earth. Therefore, there's nothing you can do to speed up the clock. And so that's one earthly aspect of the Hermit. Can you think of other earthly aspects of the Hermit? Go ahead and let me know. So, the next Earth card, and this is interesting because you kind of want it to be a fire card. Right, Mystic Soul, time is an earthly construct. It absolutely is. Because of the Christian depiction of the devil, I really wanted this to be a fire card, but it's not. It's an earth card, and doesn't that make sense? TK, TK just came in with the Hermit, has been feeling lonely, and then realizing that patience is a virtue. Yeah, indeed. And it's interesting, you know, that in the Hermit, there is both loneliness and patience. And thinking about how those two things go together, there's a lot of wisdom in that, isn't there? All right. Back to the devil. Suzanne, Hermit is definitely Capricorn energy. Everything happens in its own time. Oh, I love that. Yes, absolutely. Mary, Hermit, need to look inward and find solitude. Yes. Martha, Hermit for me often means self-autonomy and self-ownership. I love that. Like, do you see self-sufficiency in that as well? And do we think about, you know, since now we see him, you know, sort of holding that lamp, Do we see him shining a light for others? Is that part of it? Okay. Devil, Mystic Soul Oracle. Devil, master mistress of earthly delights and temptations. Yes, indeed. Earthly delights and temptations, earthly responsibilities, the limitations of the body. Absolutely. TK speaking to Suzanne, I'm a Capricorn. The time of the devil is manifesting as Capricorn now. Yeah, indeed. And I asked this question at an in-person meetup that TK was at. Can the devil ever represent anything good? And I think I was the only person there who was like, oh yeah, absolutely it can. The devil can, to me, represent a strong commitment to something, maybe a difficult thing, but something that you're going to be very, very committed to. From Jeannie, the hermit in earth, grounded, okay, back to hermit, sorry, grounded in a timeless journey. Oh, I love that. I love that. I love that. Okay. So we see the devil as a very earthly thing, and when we are chained to temptation, materialism, addiction, all of that are things of the body, things of earth, right? Absolutely. So there is one more earth card, and that is, not surprisingly, the world. Oh, Shannon, good. Thank you for bringing this up. A more positive aspect of the devil, pan energy, being playful. And sure, sometimes we can play overly much. I'm a little tired today because I played overly much last night, but I had a good time. And so, yeah, I think there is that. Marion, yes, the devil can be good. Not all pleasures are bad, just exercise caution. Right, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, very good. Good stuff, you guys. Okay, so the world. And I think it was Suzanne. Yeah, I think it was Suzanne was saying that, like, the Empress, for her, the first card in this series, is the most earthy. And I was like, well, earthier than the world, which is the earth. But in a way, I can sort of see it. Because the Empress, of course, is pregnant. She's growing food. There is this sort of creative earthiness here. Whereas when we look at the world, there's almost this sense just of the world as a celestial body. Now, I can't imagine that the world would be anything other than Earth. I mean, it is what it is. But there's so much in this card. And I think because, in a way, this card is so big, but related to Saturn is also so constricted, that it's hard to get a handle on. Now, let's go back to the devil with Robin. Can the devil also represent tunnel vision, just being attached to seeing what you see? Oh, yes, and in the most unhealthy way possible. Yes, indeed, I think so. Oh, man, Suzanne, you're brilliant. The Empress is a manifestation of the world. And absolutely, when we look at these weight-inspired images, oh my gosh, yes, because look, the Empress is pregnant. The world is being born. The wreath is actually the holy yoni through which she is being born. So in each case, we see birth. So yeah, nice connection there. Very, very good. So really, what does the world mean when you see it in a reading? For me, it can be world travel. It can be attainment, completion, having it all. I do see it as generally a positive thing. I think it can be a warning to pull back and see the bigger picture. But again, interestingly, the world is connected to Saturn. And Saturn is really all about your constriction and your limitation. But I think when we think about the world from an ecological perspective, I think it suddenly makes a whole lot of sense. Okay, so those of you who are Earth people, and we've got a lot of Earth people here today, born under the signs of Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, you know, the question is going to be, do these cards particularly describe you? Do you see yourself particularly in these cards? Now, let's move on. We started with air, then earth, and now we are going to go to fire, beginning with the Emperor. And I think it's so interesting. We know that the Emperor is fire because he's related to Aries. And yet, being a 4, we see so much stability or even stubbornness or tenacity or stuckness, depending on how you want to look at it, in the Emperor, and yet he's fire, not earth. And it's interesting to note that one of his keywords is war. He is a politician with the ability to declare war, to create war. Okay, Marion says, I see it sometimes as finding grounding in all 4 elements is represented by the 4 fixed signs on the corner of the card. So that is so interesting, looking at the corners of this card. The 4 fixed signs are also, for those of you into Christian mythology, are also the 4 evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the writers of the gospel. And when you see them in the Wheel of Fortune, they are writing their gospels. Here, the gospels are out in the world. And so that connection between Christian mythology and astrology, bang, just comes together right here in the world. That is beautiful. Suzanne loves that. I love it too. Okay, very good, you guys. Emperor is fire. So how do we see the fiery aspect of the Emperor? We see it in his leadership, in his motivation to leadership. And you know, one question that people often ask is the difference between the earthy Hierophant and the fiery Emperor. Now, remember, I said that I thought that the Empress was the authority of the home, the Hierophant, the authority of the church. The Emperor is the authority of the community. He is the politician. And arguably, these 2 earth authorities were given their authority in a more organic, earthly way. The Emperor had to win his, had to fight for it, had to campaign for it. And that's all a fiery thing. Now, the Emperor can represent your father. The Emperor can also represent your boss, just like the Hierophant can. The Emperor can represent a quality of stability. The Emperor can speak of politics and world affairs in that way. How do you see the Emperor, and how do you see fire in the Emperor? Go ahead and chat it in. And our next fire card, which I think is kind of interesting, is strength. Of course, strength is related to Leo. And as regards to the Emperor, Suzanne says fighting, a very Aries thing. Do you actually see in a reading, if you see the Emperor, would you see a fight or an argument? I'm trying to think if I've ever seen it come up that way. I think it certainly could. It hasn't really usually in my practice. I'm curious to know if it has in yours or anyone's. Okay. So strength is such an interesting card because it doesn't necessarily speak to physical strength. It speaks to the greatest strength, which is love, which is compassion. The gentle woman controls the lion, the fierce beast, with love. And I love the idea that these 2 characters, the woman and the lion, are both within us. We each have a gentle woman and a fierce lion within us. And we need each of these characters, but the gentle woman must be the one in charge. And yet, it is the lion that gives it its fiery nature. And so the question is, how is that? One of my favorite keywords for this card is compassion. And so often when I think about compassion, I think about water, about love. But here we have this fiery Leo thing going on. And I have to say, I think about like fire is passion and strength is compassion. So there's this active energy to it, active compassion, active healing, but also, under control is a key word here, but we don't often look at this card as controlling. We might look at the Emperor as controlling. We might look at the Hierophant as controlling, but not so much strength. So I think the fire energy here is such an interesting thing because this is the fire that we need. We need that fierce beast within us, but it really is about keeping it in the right balance and under control. So let me know what you think about that. Let's go back. We've got some thoughts about the Emperor. Jeannie says, the Emperor fire, struggle for power, sure. Mary says, Emperor father, disciplinarian, but leader of the community, certainly. Martha says, Emperor sometimes power over or abuse of power. Yeah, absolutely. Marion, for strength, sometimes you need to show tough love, a different side of compassion. Oh, that is so true. And it's so hard. Suzanne says, control is an aspect of a fixed sign like Leo. Absolutely. Absolutely. That totally makes sense. Okay, but how does that show up in a reading? How do we see, how operationally, when strength comes up? Sometimes I see it, very clearly just coming up as like this pat on the back from the universe. You got this. You got this under control. You got it. And it's like an affirmation. The strength card comes up as an affirmation of your own strength in a particular situation. Have you guys seen it that way? Okay. Now, let's see. Who's next? Next we have the Wheel of Fortune. And here are those 4 evangelists again. So. The Wheel of Fortune as fire. It took me a long time to figure that out. However, the idea of a wheel turning, creating friction, creating heat, creating fire, I think that's part of it. Jeannie says for strength, fire, restraint before you hurt someone, whether verbally or physically. Oh my gosh. Yes. In fact, for me, strength often comes up as my don't be a bitch card, because I can be. And strength will come up as exactly that. You said it perfectly. That's perfect. I love it. And that really is, control your fire. You have that inner fire, but, keep it under control. Is the Wheel of Fortune Sagittarius? I just have the elements listed here. I don't have the astrology. But no, it's not. And I can tell you why. Because Temperance is Sagittarius. So I know that the Wheel of Fortune is not. If someone wants to Google and let us know what the Wheel of Fortune is astrologically, that would be helpful. Because I don't remember. All right. So how else do we see fire here? I think part of it, when we talk about the Wheel of Fortune, there is that sense of when you're up, you're up. When you're down, you're down. The wheel is always turning. It will, there will always be change. Dina says it's Jupiter. Thank you so much. I was thinking that, but wasn't quite ready to say it because I wasn't ready to trust my memory. Thank you very much. That's perfect. Yes. Thank you, Dina. So, fire in the Wheel of Fortune. You know, for me, I like to bring in the humor of fire with this card. Because so often, you know, what goes around comes around. You just got to keep your sense of humor. And Marion says, well, Jupiter is usually known as the lucky planet, and this is the card of luck. That's perfect. That's exactly right. But how is luck fiery? You know, that's an interesting question. I do feel like it's sometimes sort of an energy that you can grab. And here's the Sagittarian connection, Sagittarius ruled by Jupiter. Very good. We knew you'd come round to it. Very, very good. Come round to it. Wheel of Fortune. That was fun, right? So when you see the Wheel of Fortune in a reading, very often for me, it's about a cycle. Like, you know, the couple that breaks up and gets back together and breaks up and gets back together. I see the Wheel of Fortune. Like, you've been here before. You've done this before, haven't you? Yes, and Shannon came back again. Doesn't Jupiter rule Sag? Yes, indeed it does. Dina, fire is expansive like the wheel turning, going somewhere. Yeah, beautiful. Love it, love it, love it. Kathy, the wheel, power to turn up or down the heat, to regulate. Oh, that's brilliant. Brilliant. I love that. One of the reasons I love meeting together like this and doing this kind of stuff is we really learn from each other throwing out these ideas. Okay, so the next fire card is actually my favorite card. It's Temperance. So again, you would think Temperance might be watery because of that pouring, but that's not what's going on here. What's going on here is alchemy. So there is an adding of heat. We're cooking, we're mixing, we're blending. And so in Temperance, we see that creativity. We see that sense of creating something that is greater than the sum of its parts and of making that blend. And heat is certainly part of that equation. Mystic Soul, fire can create and destroy in equal measure. Fire can be good or bad in equal measure. Absolutely, absolutely. So, the Tower, obviously a fire card. And I have a student who says that the lightning that strikes the tower down is enlightening. And I think that, you know, when we think about fire, going back to what Mystic Soul was saying, that, you know, creating and destroying with fire, both of those things are happening in this card. Fire is certainly destroying the tower, but it is also creating that which reveals the firm foundation below, that which creates a new opportunity to build something. And so we see both of those things in this card. The Sun, obviously a fire card. I will tell you that my favorite thing about the Sun is that in the weight-inspired images, the sunflowers have turned to face the child rather than facing the sun as they normally would. I see the sun as our invitation to shine as brightly as we can, to shine as brightly as the sun itself. But have you ever seen the sun come up to indicate a narcissist? Someone who really does want to shine brighter than the sun and thinks that they do. Have you ever seen that? How does the sun show up in a reading for you? What do you see there? Now, we're holding off on Judgment until the very end. It's going to be the final card that we talk about here. If you are a fire sign, the question, of course, is going to be, do you see yourself in these cards, and do you see these cards describing yourself? Now, let's do water. And we'll be here for another 15 minutes or so. This is like an hour and 15-minute webinar, typically. All right. So, the high priestess, of course, is water, and we know that. She journeys into the underworld. She journeys into the subconscious. She is certainly, and it's funny because we think about water as emotion, but I don't really see the high priestess as terribly emotional. I see her as much more serene. But she is watery in that intuitive place. Andy says all of them, yes. Okay, let's see. We've got a couple things going on here that are interesting. Marion, in a car, you need the engine fired up in order for the wheels to turn. Oh, nice, nice, nice. Shannon, sun is tolerance for me. Could you expand on that? I would love to hear more about that. Oh, Marion, I've seen the sun come up as an indication of depression. Using antidepressants can be a false happiness. So interesting. I'm all happy. Everything's fine. I'm fine. Yeah, I could see that. I could absolutely see that. That's good. Okay, so high priestess. Secrets, perfectionism. So often when this card comes up, I see the profession of either nursing or cosmetology. Isn't that fun? Issues and attitudes as regards women also show up here. And if a dude gets the high priestess reversed, so often he's a cheater or a misogynist. It can happen. Not always, but it can happen that way. So, the next water card is interesting. It's the Chariot, related, of course, to Cancer. Of course, it's a water card. And sometimes we see the charioteer the chariot is actually a boat or it's in water in some depictions. But I originally had a hard time seeing the water in this card. There's a couple of things, though. He is a hero, and a hero is altruistic. And there is that sense of side-to-side balance. Where, like a crab, the way a crab kind of moves side to side. And we see opposites pulling in unison. And so there's a sense, and like the Lovers, the card that comes before this, having an integration. There's a certain kind of integration in the Chariot that allows us to move forward. And that does feel very fluid to me. Let's see. Shannon, the little sun boy in a meditation came to me as learning tolerance for things done differently than we tend to do them. Open-mindedness. Shannon, I am going to take that and I'm going to keep it. I love it. Thank you so much. And I love that you said that it came to you in a meditation. So often, this is how the cards speak to us. We can learn our personal relationship with each card through meditation, through divination, through journaling, through exploration. But then we meet together in groups like this, we share it with each other, and it becomes part of the larger archetype. So that is just a beautiful thing. Okay, here's another one that's kind of interesting as water. The Hanged Man. Now, sometimes in some illustrations, you see the Hanged Man actually hanging above water in the picture. But, water would not be my first go-to on this. I might think fire. I might think air. How is the Hanged Man water? And for me, it has to do with the emotionalism inherent in being in an uncomfortable position and having to make the choice to have a different perspective, a different attitude, to see things differently, to see things in a different way, to recognize that we are not in control of something. Those are aspects of emotion, which is water. So let me know your thoughts on that. Now, how does the Hanged Man show up in a reading for you? For me, very often, it's a reminder to embrace the serenity prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So often, that shows up. So often that shows up. Now, the Hanged Man can also come up to say, leave it alone, man. Stay in your lane. You're not in control here. You got nothing. I do see this as a card of having to accept something that maybe you would prefer to not have to accept. Okay, let's see. For Mystic Soul, maybe the Hanged Man is the equivalent of still water and contemplation. Oh, so brilliant. That is so good. I love that. I love that. I love that. Okay. Death. Death is water, related to Scorpio. So I think about that like death being like the tides. You know, you come, you go. Nothing can really change that. It is the one certainty. The tides come in, the tides come out. Change always happens, and that is death. Yeah, I agree, Martha. Hanged Man for me has a Neptunian feel. Surrender to and merging with all that is. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. Marion, the Hanged Man, just go with the flow. Absolutely. Good stuff, you guys. So much good stuff. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing. Okay, so the moon, of course, is also water. And, you know, I often like to look at these two water cards, the moon and the high priestess together, and think about the intuition that is within them. Think about the secrets. The moon wants us to discover the secrets. Excuse me. The moon wants us to figure out what is true. The high priestess just sort of sits on those secrets and keeps those secrets. But in both of these cards, we see intuition. And in these cards, we see water in both of them. Now, the moon is such an interesting card because it can be a warning of treachery. It can be an affirmation of your own intuition. But those two things are actually not as far apart as you would think, because so often it is our intuition that warns us of treachery happening in our lives, right? Okay, so now time for two big questions. The first, judgment, water or fire? It's related to Pluto. There are traditions that ascribe it to each water or fire. I like it as fire, but there are also so many fire cards. My sense of fairness says, let's put it with water. What do you see in judgment? You know, judgment, when I was learning the cards, judgment was one of the hardest for me because it can mean so much. It can talk about closure, putting the past in the past, the final analysis. It can talk about communication, hearing your calling, hearing the voice of the angels, making your own word known. It can talk about all of these things, death and rebirth, the phoenix, new beginnings. Fire or water? Let's take a vote. Go ahead, and you can put it in either pile, but go ahead and tell us which pile you're going to put it in. So for you, is it water or fire? I'm going to go ahead and put it with water because of the emotional aspect of closure and the final analysis. So now, we have these four piles, and I am, as I did earlier, going to ask you to look at the pile associated with the element of your sun sign. And if you would like, chat in and tell us how those particular cards reflect you or how you are reflected in those cards. And as Scorpio, and I mean, you know, I also identify with my rising in a lot of ways more than I do my sun, but this is sun. So, shed a judgment, bring out your dead. I love it. Andy likes fire and water. Martha, judgment, open your eyes, see the light. I vote for fire. I'm good with it. Absolutely. Shannon votes for water. Very good. So, TK, judgment is fire. Fire is pure. Judgment is expected to be pure and objective. Robin says water and fire can both denote renewal. Exactly. Kathy says fire. Laura, judgment to me means having to learn something the hard way. Therefore, fire, trial by fire. Marion, water is the resurrection after death. To me, it makes sense as death is a water sign. Josephine, I also feel that fire is judgment. It feels like a very active and rebirthing card. Jeannie, judgment, water for me because of the choices you make, which also holds true for moon, death, chariot. Okay, so if you would like to chat in, and thank you for that. That was fun. Rogerio says judgment, fire. We're pretty 50-50 on this, I think. And again, there is no right answer. It's however you see it. And it may even change for you over time or reading to reading. That's okay too. So how do you see your sun sign, yourself, in the cards ascribed to your element? I'll just share very quickly mine. So I am a professional reader. That's my full-time gig. And so the High Priestess and the Moon both figure very strongly for me. Death and the Chariot. You know, I have probably changed my residence more times in the years I've been alive than most people you know. I joke that I'm like a ferret with no homing instinct. And so these cards speak to that, like enjoying change kind of a thing. The Hanged Man, I am an incredibly introspective person. I spend lots of time just like thinking about all kinds of stuff. So that makes sense for me too. So that's kind of fun. So if you would like to chat in your thought about how these cards speak to you and how you see attributes of yourself in the element of your sun sign, please do. Our final exercise is to shuffle each pile individually. And Robin says, my earth cards are me to a T. Perfect. Shuffle each pile individually and at random, pull one card from each pile to give you a 4-card elemental reading. And if you want, you can chat that in as well. Comment that in. Let us know what that reading means to you. And in our final few moments, I will give you my take on your final 4 cards. Okay. Okay, and I'll share with you what I got. I got Justice, the Hierophant, Temperance, and the High Priestess. And I'm really, really happy with these cards. I see me moving forward as a teacher, as a writer, moving forward in business. I see me finding my balance. Look at how Temperance and Justice both show up. These are both cards that invite us to find a balance in our lives. So does the High Priestess, for that matter. So there's a lot here about balance. And I think one of the balances we see, too, is the Hierophant kind of being out in the public and teaching and representing, but the High Priestess holding space in a much more internal way. And I do try to do both. So those are the cards that came up for me. What comes up for you? So I'm asking 2 questions. You can answer one or both. The first is, how do you see the cards associated with the element of your sun sign as reflecting yourself? And the second is, if you pull one card from each element at random, what reading do you get? So Shannon has Tower, Devil, Magician, Moon. So I'd love to know what you see there. What I see there is so much opportunity to create something new. A whole sense of figuring out what you're committed to, what you're not going to be committed to. There is so much spirituality in these cards, Shannon. There is definitely a commitment to spirituality and a commitment to letting go of what doesn't serve you in order to move forward towards something new. That is beautiful. Kathy got the Hermit, the Sun, the Star, and the Chariot. And I think that's so interesting. It makes me wonder, so what is your social energy? Are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? Are you both? Because on one hand, the Sun is kind of like out, in the public, and the Hermit is kind of not. And so I see you maybe as one who can do both and be both. And with the Chariot, there is so much ability for forward motion, maybe for travel. With the Star, opportunity for fulfillment and healing. I think the question I would ask, Kathy, is to figure out, where do you want to be? Where do you want the light to shine on you, and where do you not? Marion got Temperance, Death, Justice, and the World. Right away, Marion, I would say be patient. There are big changes coming for you, and it will be good. There's something, when I look at all of that together, Marion, I think about making your peace and having something new presented to you. Mystic Soul, Temperance, the Star, the Wheel of Fortune, and Judgment. Wow, those are all really creating something new. You are really creating something new in your life. That is a beautiful thing. Genie, Sun, Empress, Lovers, Hanged Man. You, Genie, are figuring out what you're creating and what you're going to create and how you're going to make that happen. Robin, Star, Hanged Man, Hermit, Sun, going to solitude for inner reflection and a new perspective with a goal to enlightenment. Beautiful. So that's our time. For those of you watching in archive, I thank you so much for being here. And Shannon's ringing in on hers. I have the tools to follow a better diet and make spiritual peace to have better health. Yeah, beautiful. So we're going to do this once a month. And I'm liking this Eastern 10:30 a.m. on a Saturday time, except it's 2 a.m. for Robin, so I feel bad about that. But we're doing it again next month. It's already scheduled here on my channel. I'm just checking to make sure I get the date right. Let's see. Yes, February 22nd, we're doing court cards. It'll be an hour-long workshop, no handout, but we're doing the 16 court cards of the Minor Arcana, so be here. You can set a reminder right here on the channel. If you are not subscribed yet here, please do. I want to thank you so much. I want to remind you that wherever you are in the world, I am available to you for readings or mentorship by phone, Skype, FaceTime, Messenger, WhatsApp, or if you happen to be here, you can come see me in Palm City. I want to thank you all so much for being here. This was my first time doing this, and you guys just made it so much fun. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom. It's not just about what I know. It's about what you know. And thank you for sharing what you know, what you think, what you feel with all of us. We are all richer because of it. Thank you very much. See you next month. Hopefully see you before. If we're not friends on Facebook, why not? I'll look forward to seeing y'all soon. Thanks very much.